Well, I am selfishly very excited because I have 3 couples with me that I admire and respect so much. And over the next few episodes of this short series, we are going to be talking about dating and marriage. You guys are I respect you guys so much, and I'm selfishly so excited to hear all that you're about to say. And we are going to start the series off by talking through some different questions regarding dating. I think in this culture that we are in, dating is definitely a hot topic, and there's a lot of ways to do it wrong, but there's also a lot of ways to do it right. So here with me today, we have John and Taylor Mio, and they've been married for 13 years. We have Gert and Marie, who have been married for 38 years, and then we have Brad and Susan, who have been married for 39 years. So collectively, that's a lot of years of marriage. It's a number that I'm not going to pretend to do in my head right now, but it's lots of years of marriage and lots of wisdom. And you guys have 2 kids, you guys have 3 kids and a grandbaby within the next few weeks, and you guys have no kids. So, well, you have many kids. Yeah, you have many kids that have come through other ways. But so we have lots of different perspectives and wisdom. So I'm going to start off by asking the question, should Christians only date other Christians?
Well, I'll speak to that first. I believe yes. I think Christians should only date other Christians. I think when you're dating, some people date for fun, some people date looking for a spouse, but especially if you're dating, anticipating a spouse, and you're a believer, it would be very difficult if the person you were dating was not a believer. You don't have the same foundation. You're really opening up the door for issues. I don't think your viewpoints will be the same. So I think it would bring a lot of difficulty. Plus, the Word speaks to that as well. I think when you read the scripture of not being unequally yoked, I believe that you should date only believers is kind of what I'm thinking.
I think you also need to think of when you have kids. You know, which way are you going to go with them? How are you going to educate them?
You definitely want to be thinking about someone that you're going to have a similar foundation with. If your spirituality is not unified, and that's the foundation and sort of bedrock of each of us individually, then, you know, the rest of your relationship is going to have issues. It's going to have problems.
And how can Christ be the center of your home if one person's not a believer?
Yeah.
And marriage is, it's difficult at times. And when you don't have that center, oh gosh, I can't even imagine.
And that's the reality for a lot of people. You know, like you talked about, people who are already married and one of them becomes a believer, the other one's not. It is difficult, but it's not impossible. And I think that's the other thing, is that there may be an opportunity, you know, if you're in that situation already. But if you have an option and if you have a choice, you're going to date somebody, you really need to be thinking about that ahead of time.
So what would you guys say are some healthy boundaries to have within a Christian dating relationship?
That's a very good question, though. Boundaries. I think boundaries are different for each person, but it's good to talk about them. I think you need to talk about those boundaries before you get into a situation, not when you're in a situation, to talk about it first.
Yeah, your gut reaction in a moment of passion it's not going to be a good reaction. So you have to plan ahead and think through, like, what are the things that are off limits, and a lot of those have to do with physical things, but they should also have to do with emotional things as well, because as you become vulnerable with another human being in any sense, or even spiritually in some sense, because, you know, if you pray together, that's an intimate moment, and so you have to be, that has to that has to correspond with the level of commitment that undergirds your relationship. And so where are you in your relationship will determine greatly how vulnerable you should be with that person.
If if you do cross that line, if you do go over that boundary, reset the boundary.
Yeah.
It's not like, well, I've already gone further than I wanted to, so now
Right.
it's all up in the up in the air. But really, say I'm sorry, apologize, and say that's not what we want. That's not what we talked about, and reset it. Sometimes we think when we go too far, then there's no forgiveness. There's no purity anymore, but you can regain that.
I have some experience with that with some friends of mine that did that and went too far and really felt shame and guilt and oppression from it. And we prayed, and the Lord gave the word for them that He would restore their innocence. And that mentality of restored innocence. And it's what Jesus did with us, right? Like, we are the stained bride.
Yeah.
We are the impure, harlot, essentially. And that's what He does. He comes in and restores our innocence and washes us clean again. And that's something you have to redefine your identity and who you are. It's not your past, it's where you stand today. And today can be different than yesterday.
I agree, and that is to remember that is not your identity if you make a mistake.
Yeah.
Yes.
Your identity is in Christ.
Yes.
And I think you have to set yourself up for success, like having a plan before you go into into any situations. And you should really, you give a lot of your thought life to all kinds of stuff. This is a pretty big thing. You should think about it and take time to think about it, and set boundaries for yourself. Am I going to be alone in the vehicle with with someone of the opposite sex? Am I going to be after a certain period of time late with the person of the opposite sex? Am I going to be alone at all with a person of the opposite sex with a closed door? Right? You take away the opportunity, and it's a whole lot easier to keep those boundaries. I think the biggest pitfall is that people just don't think. You don't think about those situations. You find yourself in those situations, and it's like, well, chemistry takes over. It's not like it's going to be something that you're going to be able to navigate in that moment. Yeah.
I think it's super important to not getting to passionate moments late at night where what boundaries should we have here? But determining those beforehand. And even if you are single, it's a great time to figure out what boundaries you want, or think about hey, in a relationship, what boundaries do I have? And clearly communicating those.
Yeah.
Kind of along these lines, how far is too far in a dating relationship?
I think it goes back to what we talked about with your level of commitment should correspond with the level of intimacy that you are experiencing with the person. And so in a marriage, your commitment is for life. So that's the only commitment strong enough to undergird a sexual relationship. Holding hands is an act of intimacy, but not necessarily sexual. And it's sort of at your discretion when you start thinking, through it, what is going to push you toward that line, and just backing up past that, and not pushing the line as far as you can. How far is too far is almost the wrong question, because you don't not the wrong question, but you shouldn't really be thinking in your mind, how far can I go? You should be thinking in your mind, I want to have a pure, good relationship that will make it, right? I want a relationship that's going to make it. And if you have a relationship that makes it, it means that you have a commitment underneath it.
And again, if you haven't held that, you don't have to just say, well, it's already done with. So, but you can still, like I said, restore those boundaries. God does that with us all the time with so many different things.
Yeah, and along those same lines, I can just say that for the girls that are listening to this, if he's not willing to wait for you, he's not worthy of you.
Yes.
That's a very important thing to remember.
I think I've learned, like, with this subject, like, if you look in the Beatitudes, Jesus talks about, like, whoever looks at a woman lustfully has, like, already committed adultery in his heart. So I think it's not just physically how far you can go.
That's
I
right.
think you cross the line when you do things that cause you to think about it.
That's right.
So I really think in a relationship there has to be clear communication of, like, okay, does holding your hand or holding my hand make you have impure thoughts? Does kissing make you have impure thoughts? Because if the answer is yes, then you've crossed the line. So it's not just physically what is too far. It's what are you doing that mentally causes the other person to go too far.
Yeah.
So, and you know, there's going to be different strengths that people have there, but if you have to communicate about it.
I was going to say that's for the individual too, because I wouldn't know where your line is,
Yeah.
you know, or where his is or whatever. But God will tell you. He won't have a problem explaining it. You know.
Yeah.
Well, and one more thing to that, I think a lot of the issues with dating and boundaries and all of these things is that we push off marriage so far. And so many couples end up in long relationships of dating and living together and on all of these things. And so it's like almost impossible to not cross that boundary when you've been together for so long. That's what the church culture needs to do more of, is helping these couples get to a place where they can get married and encourage that and encourage what that looks like and why it's so wonderful to get married and to not have long dating relationships or long engagements, that kind of thing. So.